Hi, I'm David Hamburger, back with my next lesson in this series on playing the changes on the blues. Now, in the last lesson, we talked about the swing blues turnaround. And this is the idea that when you're playing in the swing style or playing on jump blues, that instead of playing a 5-4-1 turnaround in the last 4 bars of the blues, you play a 2-5-1 turnaround. And then we looked at how to actually improvise over that. So for instance, if you're in the key of B flat, a 5-4 turnaround would be 5, F7, E flat, that's the 4 in the key of B flat, back to 1, B flat. But a 2-5 turnaround would be C minor, that's the 2 in the key of B flat, to F7, the 5, to 1. And that 2-5-1 sound is more typical of the way swing musicians play on the blues. Now, when you get to the way jazz musicians play on the blues, this is basically what happened sort of in the bebop era and beyond. And the bebop era is kind of what grew out of the swing era, and a more elaborate way of playing on the changes, more elaborate way of thinking about the chords. And so, looking at this 2-5-1 turnaround, the bebop musicians thought, well, if I'm going to get to this 2 minor chord, is there a more elegant or interesting way I can get there than just going up from the 1 chord that I was on? And they thought, well, okay, what if we put a dominant chord in front of this? What if we said, okay, we're going to C minor, that's cool. What if C minor was the 1 chord? It's not, but what if it was? If C minor was the 1 chord, the 5 of C minor would be G7. And so if we wanted to have a strong resolution into C minor, we could play G7 to C minor, because G7 is the 5 of C minor, even though C minor is not the 1 chord of the key we're in. And so what G7 actually is the 6th chord in the key of B flat. So that's where you get the idea. This is 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. And the 6 is the dominant chord that leads you to the 2 chord, to the C minor in this case. So if you want to play on those changes, then you have to be able to play something over the G7 chord. And so that's what we're going to look at right now. So let's say you were playing in B flat up in this position. In a couple of previous lessons I talked about the swing scale and the upper position of the swing scale. So here I'm using the upper position of the B flat swing scale. And if that's super mystifying to you, you can dig back and find those earlier videos in this series and check it out. But if we're here, we'd be playing through the first 7 bars of the blues before we had to deal with this G7 chord. And when we did land at this point, we would need to find some way to play over G7 in a cool way that resolved to C minor. Now, if we look for someplace nearby to get G7, if you go here, here's a G major triad. Here's G and B and D, the root 3rd and 5th of G. So that's pretty close to here, right? You can just reach over and grab it. And so the question is, what else can we do with it? Now, one thing about the sound of the 6th chord that's going to the 2 chord is that it's not considered just sort of a straight dominant chord that has, say, the 9th and the 13th on it, the so-called natural upper notes of the chord. It's not those notes that you would naturally get by just extending up the sound of a G Mixolydian scale, going in terms of chord tones, root 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. Those notes on top, the 9 and the 13, get lowered by a half step in order to sound good resolving to a minor chord. Now, this is all making your head explode. Don't worry, because you don't need to know this to try the sound out. But if you're curious about why it is what it is, I'm just going to sort of blitz through this little explanation of it. So these notes are going to go down a half step. The 13 and the 9 are going to be down a half step from where they belong. And since they're not the normal notes, they're the ones that have been lowered by a half step, they're considered to be altered. They've been changed. So that's why a chord that has, say, a sharp 9 or a flat 9 on it, or a flat 13, is called an altered chord. It's just one or more of those three notes that makes it an altered sound and not just sort of a regular 9th or 13th or 7th chord. So when we look at this triad, we can take this, the root, the third, the fifth, and even the flat 7, and then we can put on those altered notes. So instead of playing natural 6, we can play flat 6, and then we can still play the 4 as usual. And then instead of playing the second, we can play the flat second. So those are our notes when we're on this G7. And so from here, we could just come straight down the scale. 7, flat 7, flat 6, 5, 4, 3, flat 2, root, flat 7. And that'll resolve to the flat third of C minor. So that's one way to do it. So if we're going along, 1, 2, 3. There's that altered scale in context, going from B flat to G to C minor. And in the lesson where I talked about the 2-5-1 resolution, we used a bunch of moves like this. And so this altered lick will lead you right into that 2 sound that you need. So that's one way to do it. There's a lick that just takes up one measure from the downbeat. 1, 2, 3, and resolves to a note of C minor. Now you could do all kinds of other things with this. There's an altered lick that uses the same kinds of notes, but resolves to the 5th of C minor. So there's, in terms of G, there's 5, flat 6, 5, 4, 3, flat 2, flat 7, and then chromatically up to the 5th of C minor. So that's another way to do it. And then there's another one. So coming in from the flat third to the third of G, 3, flat 2, flat 7, chromatically up to the root, 5, flat 7, chromatically down to the flat third of C minor. So every one of these is resolving to a chord tone of C minor because that's the next place we're going to go. So let me roll a track that goes from the 1 to the 6 to the 2 and around again, and just play through these 3 licks in context so you can hear how they sound and what they do. Here's the first one. Resolves to C. And the next one, just let this go around. Here's the next one. Finally, the last one. Keep going like that. So those are 3 ways you can take that sound, and at each point they resolve to a note of C minor. You could keep going with them. Let me play through one more time, and this time I will keep going. So I'll take that first lick. Well, this one, I guess. Right, just coming straight down the scale. And then I'll keep going and play through the 2 to the 5 to the 1. So here we go. So first this one. That's going straight down the scale, landing on the flat third of C minor. So there's this one. On the 5th of C minor, and finally we could do this one. Which lands on the flat third 3rd of C minor again. Okay, so let me take this and now continue on through the 2 chord, the 5 chord, around to the 1. So putting this altered sound in the context where I'm going to play one of those licks that I talked about in the previous lesson about playing over the 2 chord and then using the sound of the blues to resolve that to the 1. So here's all of that. And finally, let me just play through a whole chorus of the blues in B flat, and just basically pretty much play blues or swing scale ideas until we get to the 6th chord and everything we've been doing, so you can hear it in the context of a whole chorus. Okay, so that's the altered sound, and that's the way that it fits into the context of the jazz blues. So I hope that makes sense, and so take the stuff we did with the swing scale and try to build on that with working in the sound of the 6th chord. I hope you have fun working on that. For Fretboard Confidential, I'm David Hamburger. I'll see you next time.